Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So Paul tells us himself in various places, the book of Galatians and first letter to the Corinthians and Philippians, that he violently persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. So think about that for a moment. Here's this young man, Saul, who was raised as a zealous Jew and was trying to destroy the church. Now, the question might rightly be raised, why was he trying to destroy the church? Well, let's think about it for a moment here. The first letter to the Thessalonians, which we believe is one of Paul's letters, suggests that the churches of Judea were persecuted. So those churches that were around Jerusalem, around the places where, for instance, Stephen was martyred. Also, the Acts of the Apostles suggest that Saul may have participated in those persecutions. So the Acts of the Apostles offers various verses, various passages that suggest that Paul was persecuting the church. So why did he persecute it? Was it perhaps due to his zeal? We heard that he was a zealous young Jew. What happens when you're zealous about anything? Right? No matter what your religion is, when you are zealous, it means that you think you're right, and those other people, they're wrong. The book of Philippians says that the young Saul was, quote, according to the law a Pharisee, according to zeal a persecutor of the church, and according to the righteousness based on the law, blameless. Ooh, end quote. Think about that for a moment. What does that mean? He saw himself as being very zealous, following the law, which meant that if you follow the law, he saw himself as entirely blameless, like the chief priests of his day. Follow me now. What happened with the chief priests of his day? Who called for the crucifixion of Jesus? The chief priests. Why? What did Jesus do? He blasphemed. He was attributing powers of God to himself. He was saying that he was forgiving sins. Who forgives sins? God alone forgives sins. So the religious leaders of Jesus' day were zealous as well, and they persecuted Jesus, killed him. Saul, I imagine, simply saw himself as following in the footsteps of those religious leaders, of those Pharisees of Jesus' day. Right? Where Jesus was obviously a blasphemer, put to death, and so he was simply following in that tradition of the Pharisees and their interpretation of the law. Letter C, the charges against Stephen included advocating destruction of the temple. Whoa, think about that for a moment. If you're a Jew, where is the primary center of your religion? The temple in Jerusalem. What is Stephen saying? Destroy the temple? What do we have to do with a guy like Stephen? We've got to get rid of him. Letter D, we remember that Jesus was condemned by the Jewish authorities as a blasphemer for the things he did. I mean, he openly violated the law. Jesus was not following the law, and he didn't even encourage his disciples to follow the law. He was saying that the Sabbath, the law, was made for us and not vice versa. And letter E, we've talked about this in former courses, but we remember that Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23 says, anyone hung on a pole is under God's curse. What did Jesus die on? A cross, a pole. Which is why we say Jesus died a goddamn death, which simply means that it was believed that anyone who's crucified had been abandoned by God, was under God's curse. So the thought of God raising up someone who had died on the pole, who was the curse, under the curse, was incredible. Paul was simply following in this tradition, that this Jesus of Nazareth, whoever he was, and his followers were blaspheming and not following our law and advocating for the destruction of our temple. And so what do we have to do with these people? We've got to take care of business, got to get rid of them. The conversion on the road to Damascus, which we find both in Paul's letter to the Galatians and also in the Acts of the Apostles. So there are various unresolved issues with the conversion. 1 Corinthians says that Paul saw Jesus Whereas the accounts in the Acts of the Apostles simply say that Paul heard Jesus. So did Paul see Jesus, which is what we see in his letters, or did Paul hear Jesus, as we find in the Acts of the Apostles? We'll never know. It's two different sources. Did Luke somehow rank this appearance on a lower level than the risen Christ's post-resurrection appearances? Because remember, Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke, and then Luke wrote the Acts of the Apostles. What does that mean? Luke talks about Jesus rising from the dead and appearing to people, but how interesting that Luke doesn't talk about Jesus appearing to Paul. He talks about Paul hearing a voice. What does Paul say? Paul says that he saw Jesus. Another unresolved issue. The question is whether Paul knew from that moment on about his mission in life. Acts of the Apostles paints a dramatic conversion story on the road to Damascus. Was it really that quick, that sudden, and all of a sudden Paul was going down the right road after that? Or was it some process where at the end of it, Paul looked back and realized that, whoa, somehow I've changed? Isn't that often how change is more often in our lives? That is, like, we find ourselves getting older and doing different things, believing different things in life, and then when we look back, maybe it's not so dramatic as we're led to believe. So did he know his mission from that very moment, or only after he found the Gentiles so receptive to the gospel? He believed that his mission was to go out to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. Did he really believe that from that moment of conversion? Or was it simply that he went around the Jews and found them so receptive that he came to this conclusion that, you know what, I think my life is going to be about going out to the Gentiles and telling them about Jesus. When I go and preach to them, they are so thirsty. They ask for more. They don't let me go at night. I tell them stories and they want to hear more. Is that how he came to a sense of mission? Maybe I could make a life's work out of this, of going around to the Gentiles and telling them about Jesus. Or was it this conversion experience on the road? Boom. Oh, okay, I'm going to go preach to the Gentiles. In the Acts of the Apostles, Jesus says he's sending Paul to the Gentiles. But remember again, the Acts of the Apostles was written by Luke, so it's not as if Paul is saying this. In Galatians, though, Paul says that God was pleased to reveal his Son to or in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles. So Paul obviously realized that his mission in life was to preach to the Gentiles. The question is, where did that mission come from? Did it come from that moment on the road to Damascus? Or, was it based on more subsequent reflection? We remember that the gospel doesn't insist on circumcision or strict observance of the Jewish law. Think about that for a moment. So St. Paul is taking this message out to the Gentiles, namely that in order to believe in Christ, do you have to be circumcised? No. Oh, thank goodness. Do you have to follow all sorts of Jewish dietary laws? No cheeseburgers, no pepperoni pizza, no shrimp, no catfish, no pork, and on and on and on? No. You who are Gentiles, go ahead and eat those things. You can still do those things and be a follower or a believer in Jesus. So Paul found a receptive audience among the Gentiles. When you're preaching among the Jews, though, there are going to be more difficulties simply because these Jews believe one thing. They believe certain things. Thou shalt not eat pepperoni pizza. Thou shalt not eat shrimp. Thou shalt not eat lobster. Thou shalt not eat pork, etc., etc. So in order to be able to convince them, that's a big sell. Selling non-Jews, though, that's different. They're thirsty. They're looking for a person like Jesus.